Jai Hind, Namaste, welcome to Galp Taru, the Tree of Stories, which is a celebration of Indian folktales. My name is Ambalika and I am an author and storyteller, and on the occasion of the 75th year of Indian independence, I am on a mission to take the Indian folktales to the world. Would you like to join me in my mission? I invite you to join me on my journey, and it's really very simple. All you have to do is hit on the subscribe button and click that bell notification so that whenever any of the stories come live, you don't miss it. For those of you who are watching this for the first time, I invite you to also come and check out our Curtain Raiser series, which is a supplement to the folk story episodes, because in those videos you are going to find nuggets of information not easily found anywhere else. And wouldn't you like to be more knowledgeable about your country on this special occasion? Sure. And if you like them, whether it's the curtain raisers or the folktales, please do give us a like and leave a comment so that we know that you have really enjoyed it. Our next folktale in Galp Taru is from the Marathi language. Marathi, which is a derivative of the Maharashtra Prakrit language, which is an offshoot of the pure form of Vedic Sanskrit. Interestingly, no Marathi literature made appearance until the 13th century when the Gavli kings of Devgiri were ruling, and they replaced Konkani and Kannada with Marathi. Of course, copper inscriptions dating back to 1086 CE do tell us that Marathi was very commonly used, because we have records of a land grant being given to a Brahmin which is written in the Marathi language. But literature still had to wait until the 13th century. And then when it did appear, it was mostly in the form of devotional and philosophical poems written by saint poets. Nothing much happening there, and that is what continued even when the Deccan Sultanates started ruling the Marathi-speaking belt. The Sultanates were from the Bijapur and the House of Bahmani, and these invasions actually put people on a back foot when it came to literature. So Hindu scriptures were near about forgotten. So any work done, any literary efforts taken during this time is more on the revival of the Indian epics and scriptures, and this seemed to have influenced the Christian missionaries, because we have records of a certain Goa-based missionary named Thomas Stephens, who in the year 1616 wrote an epic poem on the life of Jesus Christ, which was styled along the lines of Hindu devotional poems, and he called it Krista Purana. So that's all that was happening even during the period of the Deccan Sultanates. And after that came the Peshwas, the Maratha Empire. This period is generally considered to be a decline for Marathi literature, because again there was nothing much happening at all. But things get really interesting after the fall of the Maratha Empire. In 1818, after the third and final Anglo-Maratha War was fought, the East India Company and therefore the British officially entered the Marathi scene. And their first challenge was to learn this language and to help easy conversations and translations, and to ensure that nothing was lost during the translations between Marathi and English. They assigned this task of compiling a dictionary onto one of their youngest officers, James Molesworth, who was at that point in time posted in Solapur. He himself was new to Marathi language. He was hardly in his early 20s and very new to India as well, and Marathi was the last thing he had on his agenda to learn. Yet the task was assigned to him and he was very much up to it. He set up a team of 7 Brahmins and 3 English scholars and went about collecting every possible Marathi word, proverb, phrase, idiom, sayings, and continued to do so until he had about 60,000 of them, not just in Marathi but also their translated English equivalent. And by the time he finished this work, it was 1857. Oh, pretty unfortunate year. But in 1857, he completed his work and found that he had produced a Marathi to English and English to Marathi combined dictionary running to 951 pages and weighing about 2 kilograms. Well, the first challenge after the compilation was to find someone to print and publish it. It did run into trouble because finding the type for this kind of a work was not easy. It had to be acquired from Calcutta, but all difficulties said and done, they were overcome. And fun fact, or maybe I should say amazing fact, is that this dictionary, even though it was only printed occasionally and gradually until 1975, even today it continues to be available both in print as well as in the digital format. Isn't that something truly wonderful? Well, when the dictionary completed 150 years of its existence, there was a lot of celebration. That's all that I can say. Of course, in the Marathi language medium, there was a lot of celebration and hailing of the good work done by James Molesworth. The only other contribution that was happening to the Marathi language was through education. Of course, the missionaries had an upper hand over here, and no surprises here. It was the Portuguese, Dutch, German and French missionaries who had an upper hand over here, having arrived much earlier than the East India Company. So they had set up lots of schools and also printing presses, which served the dual purpose of printing and publishing both the Bible as well as school textbooks. The East India Company, and this is my interpretation, decided to adopt a policy of be with them if you can't beat them, and joined in creating a very healthy climate of promoting Western education, Western science especially. Elphinstone was totally in favor of this, though he was also in favor of preserving the Maratha records and the Indian traditional style of learning, the Dakshina style, and he wanted some aspect of that to be incorporated in the scholarships that were given out for meritorious students. This enthusiasm that Elphinstone had can be considered to be a source of inspiration for one of his contemporaries, Grant Duff, who went on to write the book The History of the Marathas. But unfortunately, he had to wait until he got back to England so that he could publish it out of his own purse. After 1857, things get really very interesting in Marathi literature. One is influence of the mutiny, Sepoy mutiny, in creating a new body of literature, and second, how literature influenced freedom struggle. The brutal manner in which the East India Company had crushed the Sepoy mutiny had scarred the psyche of the common people, so much so that they were not willing to talk about it openly for a really very long time, let alone write about it. However, a few courageous people did write, but they took their own time and they were very cautious as well. Nevertheless, as early as in 1864, we have records of a book being written which was comparing the contemporary situation prevailing with the situation that was before the arrival of the British. And this book, written by Krishnanath Raghunath Ji, was critical of the revolt and applauded the British for their orderly and benevolent rule. So it was trying to talk about it, but in a really very cautious manner, treading a very fine line between not offending and yet talking about what they really felt about the revolt. Then in 1869, somewhere between 1869 and 72, a poem was written by M.M. Kunte using Shivaji Maharaj as the metaphor, and it was titled Raja Shivaji, and it showed how things would have been different had it been the times of Shivaji's rule. Then in 1875, we have a book coming out which documents the history of the Sepoy mutiny, and it was written by B.N. Oak, 1874. And thereafter, in 1883, we had N.N. Ranadive writing a novel, Shikshak. The novel was titled Shikshak, and it criticized the policy of annexation which Lord Dalhousie had been using to expand the British Empire in India. And in 1895, we had D.N. Paranis writing a biography on the life of Rani Lakshmi Bai, in which he very politely pointed out that it was a political mistake on her part to have joined the revolt. So these were some of the things that came out of the 1857 Sepoy mutiny. But there is something else which is more interesting. You see, the thing with the records of 1857 is that predominantly they are from a British perspective. An Indian perspective has largely been missing, and it has generally been believed that it's because the Indians did not bother to write it because we have an oral or a word of mouth tradition, or it has been believed that while it has been written and documented somewhere, either it is in Urdu or it's some secret language and it's lost. So we really do not know what the Indians were actually thinking or how they experienced the sepoy mutiny. Whereas from the non-Indian side, it has been reported through the eyes of an officer's wife, as a soldier, a spy, and the officers themselves. And there are of course war dispatches and correspondents who were covering the war. It has been covered from all these angles, but the Indian perspective has largely been missing. Thankfully, Marathi literature attempts to fill this void in the form of a book, Majhi Pravas. His book is titled Majhi Pravas, 1897च्या बंदाची हकीकत, which in English means My Journey, Reportage on the Rebellion of 1857. And it was written by a Brahmin, Vishnu Bhatt Godse, popularly known as Godse Bhattji, and it is his first-hand experience of how he saw and experienced the revolt of 1857. You see, Bhattji Godse belonged to a family of Brahmins who had been always serving the Peshwas. So since generations they had been at the service of the Peshwas. But in 1818, after the East India Company took over the Maratha Empire, they had just two options. One, to customize or adapt their knowledge to serve this new set of people, outsiders who had come in. And the second was to say no and be unemployed. Bhattji Godse's father had chosen to be unemployed because for him probably it was a matter of loyalty and a sense of insecurity that will these Britishers understand anything about Brahmanism and the Indian culture. So he chose to stay unemployed, and this brought down the family into poverty. But Bhattji Godse was an ambitious young man and he wanted to earn his livelihood. So he left Alibag where his family was residing, and at that time Alibag was under direct control of the British rule. So he left Alibag and decided to move to the court of the Gwalior king when he heard that the Gwalior king, was preparing to conduct a huge yajna, and Godseji believed that he could make a significant contribution to it, and who knows, even get the patronage of the king, and then that would make his life. So he left early in 1857, just before the revolt started. He left for Gwalior. On his way, he encountered two soldiers who were returning from the northern regions to their hometowns in Goa, and through their interactions, Bhattji Godse came to understand that there is a revolt in progress, and these soldiers advised him not to go any forward because his life might be in danger. But Godseji was not going to give up so easily. He took in their advice but continued with his journey. Eventually he reached Jhansi, and by the time the revolt had been done with Meerut, it had been done with Delhi, and it had spread out and it had become a wildfire. In Jhansi he was welcomed heartily by Rani Lakshmi Bai, and he won her patronage, and he was doing a lot of religious rituals for her. And through his time in Jhansi, we get to know about the daily routine of Lakshmi Bai, how she was perceived by the masses, what was her equation with her subjects, how did she rule, what was her daily routine like. And while Bhattji Godse was still in Jhansi, it was attacked by the British. So he was a witness to all the massacres and looting done by the British, and he and God alone know how he escaped and saved himself from those miseries. And from there on, he started his return journey back to Alibag. He lost whatever he had earned at the court of Jhansi, and he was back to square one. So it's like on his onward journey, he was hearing and living the experiences of the sepoys crushing the British troops, and on his return journey it was the reverse. He experienced the British crushing the sepoys. So he saw both sides of it, both the atrocities. So he experienced all of this in 1857-58, but he did not start writing about it until 1883. And he completed this book in 1885, but the book was published only in 1907 after the death of Vishnu Bhattji. So now you can have an idea of what it must have been like, what the fear must have been like in his mind, that he wants to voice his honest opinions, but at the same time he's also scared of what is going to befall him should he speak out so openly. And yet we have to salute his spirit for having documented things so minutely for us to know. In fact, Majhi Pravas is regarded as a classic in Marathi literature. The other thing that the Sepoy Mutiny did was to influence the Marathi theatre scene. You see, up until then, Marathi theatre was just a source of entertainment. But after the mutiny, it became a source of introspection. It started questioning about the political and social issues that people were facing. Because you see, by then a class of Marathi society had evolved, which had benefited from the reforms and various new initiatives introduced by the British rule, but at the same time they also had a sense of insecurity and a misplaced identity. Who do they identify as? 100% pure Marathis, or British influenced Marathis, or anglicized Marathis? What is this happening? So that was this mishmash of an identity happening, and so they were questioning themselves, and all these questions took a satirical tone, and this reflects in the kind of plays that were written. So we can say that this was really a good introspective time for the theatre. It was a period of revival, and by 1880 it had become a powerful tool for advancing the political ambitions of the Marathi leaders. The one who influenced the scene most was Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Many of his followers wrote plays that were based on his ideology, and in those plays Tilak was the protagonist and the British rule was the villain. And this was of course a source of concern for the administration, and they actively started scanning playwrights and plays that were being written, performed, published, and if they found anything scandalous which was unacceptable for them, or they felt that was going to fire nationalism in the people, they were suppressed or banned. And very strict and harsh punishments were given out to the people who were writing it. And this also led to the introduction of the Dramatic Performance Act of 1876. And if you're wondering if this act is still in force, then yes, even after independence, even today, it is in force. But an amended form of it is being used, and various states have amended it and used it as per their requirements from time to time. But it was not all that gory all the time. There were really genuine scholars who admired India for the kind of gems, literary and knowledge gems that she had, and worked towards understanding, appreciating it, and spreading it and sharing it with the rest of the world. For instance, there was Dr. John Wilson, who did his research on Vedic literature and wrote about the Zoroastrians of India. Then there was Lieutenant Colonel Vance Kennedy, who published a treatise on Vedanta, and there was Wilson Jones, who translated Kalidas's Shakuntala into English. And that's how things stand on the Marathi literature front. And because predominantly it has been focusing on religion and philosophy, the folk tale chosen for this week, the next episode of Galp Taru, is also themed on these aspects. The folk tale that we are going to feature next is titled Buffalo into Rooster. Buffalo into Rooster, not and. This is a very short and sweet story about doing good under all possible circumstances. Not thinking about the results, not thinking of how it's going to impact you, just doing good because doing good is the only way of life. And when we keep doing good, automatically good comes to us. We don't have to run after good. Good lands on our lap, so to speak. I was really deeply touched and also encouraged when I read the story. In fact, I felt my spirits lift up and inspired to be good, do good, and leave everything else to the universe. And I thought, yay, this is definitely going to be the next story that we need to feature in Galp Taru. So while I go ahead and prepare that story, you go ahead, click on that subscribe button and tick that bell notification so that when the story comes live, you don't miss it. I'll see you soon. Until then, Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.